Hey everyone, before we jump into this episode, we do want to note that parental discretion is advised. We have a very open and frank discussion, so please make sure your little ones aren't within earshot while listening. Thank you, and please enjoy another episode of the Collab Podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Collab Podcast. My name is Michelle. I'm here with my sister Devin, and we have a very important, very special guest with us today. We actually had another episode slotted that was going to be released at this time, but we wanted to take a pause and bring in a very dear friend of ours who we've known for many, many years, and talk about some things that are currently happening in the dance community. And I will first say, and I know Devin feels this way, I feel really privileged to know this person. I feel really blessed. And it's interesting because before we hit record, we were reflecting on how long we've actually known each other. And we've known Janelle, who is our guest today. We've known Janelle for quite some time, and we've seen her blossom into this beautiful, amazingly powerful person and dancer who is so creative and so artistic. And I am just in awe every time I see you dancing, or I see you on Instagram, and I wish I could be you when I grow up. So please welcome Janelle Adviento. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
I'm so happy to be here again. Like, as we're reflecting, I think I met you ladies when I was 15, and I think I started teaching at the Box when I was only 16 or 17 maybe, and now I'm turning 26 this year. And that's when I first had a platform to share my artistry at all, and I didn't have any really teaching experience, and you believed in me, you saw something in me, and it's always that first step that really like pushes you forward, and you girls give me momentum. So like, I'm forever thankful for you.
We're so grateful for you too, Janelle. And even back then at 15, 16 years old, you were such a powerhouse. Like, oh my gosh.
I didn't know what I was doing, but you believed in me, and that's all I like. I'm just so thankful for that. It's definitely been a long time coming, and as I reflect back, I'm just forever thankful for like anyone who's ever crossed my path, but especially you girls, since like you were there from the get-go, and you saw something in a young high schooler who had no experience. And so I just, yeah, it's amazing to see how far 10 years can take all of us, right?
Well, and we've known you in this 10 years, but and we said this before we started recording too, we haven't been the best at keeping in touch. So, we're going to dive into, a really deep discussion. But before we get into that, I want to hear what you've been up to. So tell us about what you've been up to these last 10 years.
Wow. Okay. So I think, I've always been affiliated with the community in San Diego. And so going from junior team to 220, and also taking my dive into the industry as well, kind of dipping my toes in there. I think more recently, I started traveling mainly over to Asia, and finding a lot of fulfillment in sharing abroad, and choreographing and working and dancing with some really amazing people in the entertainment world. And I'm, again, like, as I talk about this, I'm just always reflecting on like where it all came from. And I know we're in a time of quarantine right now, but I'm still, and I know like a lot of the people in the entertainment industry are kind of, we're going through this phase of like, do we need to transition to something else? Or like, our careers are kind of in the state of like in a place where we're just not sure about the security of the world, right? And nonetheless, like our jobs. So, but I'm really thankful that I've accumulated like the friendships, relationships, and like the experiences. I think like lately, I've been going to China back and forth for the last 3 years, and I'm here. I'm happy that I was here. Like the last time I visited was back in October, and I think that's like before everything all started. I was able to come back safe and sound and healthy, And since then, I've for the last year as well, I started my own company with 2 other people in our community, and it's called S1E4, which stands for Strength in Numbers. And it basically gives a platform for dancers to explore the web of dance, right? So it's more so teaching dancers or guiding dancers on a path to fulfill their own goals rather than like one team goal. Whether that be professional dancing in the industry, or whether that be opening your own studio, whether that be I just want to know how to build my resume and take headshots, or I just want to learn how to I just want to upkeep my dancing and like train. That's all I want to do. And whatever their goal is, we help them attain that. And so basically there's always kind of been a void in like that further education. So for the last year and a half, this is what we've been working on with S1E4. So that's kind of what I've been up to, just like transitioning our company and moving forward with that. So it's been a good journey. It's been a really good journey.
I just got goosebumps like listening to you talk about that. That's amazing. Thank you for the work that you're doing for the community.
Again, I'm just every day I'm counting my blessings. You know, like we're in a state where like our culture's climate is just not, you know, honestly, like in all ways possible, we're going through a crisis. So I'm counting my blessings every day, reminiscing about where this journey has taken me. And so I'm just trying to keep my focus on that moving forward. You know?
I love the idea of strength in numbers because I think it, particularly in the dance community, it takes a village to, really pursue and attain your goals. And I love that your business is set up so that you are hitting goals across the dance community because, not everybody wants to do industry stuff. Not everybody wants to open their studio. Not everyone wants to, do all these other things that are available in dance. Maybe you just want to dance. Maybe you just want to improve yourself that way. And so I love that your business covers the entire spectrum of that. I think that's really powerful. And it's a testament to who you are as a person, Janelle, because I think, we've always seen the power in you. We've always seen your creativity. And, this business is a great reflection of you. So congratulations on that. That's awesome.
Currently going through, as all teams throughout San Diego or just like in the nation, currently going through transition where, we're trying to see how we can take as much as possible work through this quarantine and trying to transition to like virtual learning and et cetera, et cetera. So we're taking this time to like really leverage all of that, explore technology more. And I think all teams can feel me, or just like studio owners and things like that can feel me when I say like, it's a journey for sure. Like none of us expected it, but I think, again, like our team's called Strength in Numbers because we understand like, although we're here trying to pursue the individual goal, we have to work together in order to get there. Like if you want to go far, go together. No matter like if your goals are different. I think at the end of the day, like we all want to dance. We all love dance and the artistry of it. So same thing with like studio owners, business owners, dance leaders, like we're all struggling together through all of this, but we're all going to get there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I couldn't have said it better myself. And I think that, Devin and I reflect all the time on, if we still have the studio open, what we would do. I don't think that we would do well under these circumstances. I mean, just in terms of, our being able to adapt, as quickly as you need to survive in a climate like this. And, I think it was a blessing in disguise to close at the time that we did. I mean, we still mourn the loss of our business, but I definitely empathize with a lot of business owners and studio owners and dancers in the community because we're having to switch to a different way of life. We're so used to seeing each other face to face and going to studios and going to teach class and we're turning towards a virtual world. So I applaud you and your business for being so adaptable and being so flexible to that.
Yeah, as dancers, creatives, humans, like we need interaction. Like I think all of us are craving it. We can't just, some people can, but most of us can't just turn our screen on and feel fulfilled as much as we are in the studio. We can't feel as fulfilled just like dancing in solitude in our room every single day. Like we need that interaction. We need that hands-on learning. We need the energy that like cannot be replaced with. So yeah, definitely missing that for sure. But can't wait for when all of this kind of finds its way so that we can at least, there's no rush getting into the studio because obviously everyone's health and safety is priority. But I personally can't wait until we find that vaccine and we finally get our butts in the studio and just move forward.
I agree. And again, thank you for the important work that you're doing, with your business and sort of a weird transition here, but you continue to do important work in the community. And part of the reason why we brought you on to talk with us today is, based on some current events, some things that have currently happened with you. So, of course, we talked about this beforehand. Share as much as you feel comfortable with. And let's go ahead and dive into this discussion. I think it's really important for us to have this type of discussion, particularly for women in the dance community. I know that males are affected as well, but, I really want to hear from your point of view about your experience, and let's dive right in. So tell us what happened.
We're going to definitely be diving into like a lot of sensitive material. So these are our trigger warnings for things that may make you feel uncomfortable, especially if you've had experiences in these situations. But as I've discussed with a lot of people over the past few weeks under these topics, I realize now that how important it is to use the proper vocabulary and to not beat around the bush about the situations at hand. And so I personally am going to refrain from saying things like made me feel uncomfortable, made them feel uncomfortable, or touched this person in a certain way. I think like our trigger warnings will be on the topics of rape, assault, sexual harassment, molestation, grooming, and coercion, and things of that nature. So moving forward, I am going to express that, vocabulary, just so that we can be transparent about how real this is, and that we are not here to really beat around the bush, but to confront it as what it is, to not take away from the seriousness of the matter.
It's an uncomfortable discussion to have, but I love that you put that out there. It's important to really use the correct vocabulary. The goal of this is to make it as educational as possible and to really empower our listeners to take action and to have these really uncomfortable and necessary discussions.
Basically, I posted something on Instagram, and it was, to my surprise, but I think looking back, I probably shouldn't be as surprised, but just wasn't expecting as much attention or momentum from a single post that I would publicize. But I posted and revealed an email thread that I interacted with back in January, I think, of this year, with someone who was, I didn't know them. As far as I knew, it was just like some person wherever they were. I wasn't sure who they were. It was under a different name that I wasn't familiar with. And they were interacting with me, asking for some inappropriate things. And lo and behold, I found out that it was someone who I did business with last year. They invited me to teach at their studio. I consider them a friend. I consider them someone I trusted. So obviously that's a big shock, right? And I confronted them, and the final email was kind of what really motivated me to share this experience, because I think that it was a shock to see the reaction and how manipulative a lot of the verbiage was, because there was a lot of, it was as if, and I think it's important to talk about like in transparency, because some people don't recognize this, and, a lot of complimenting, a lot of like, almost like, post grooming in a sense where, someone is trying to get out of a situation, relate to you, re-identify their relationship with you in hopes that you can move forward and just kind of forget about it. And it's just a slap on the wrist. Okay, like that wasn't anything that we have to like publicize or like share with anyone, And I think that in doing that, at the time I wanted to share it. And to be honest, I received, like from confidants, I received mixed feelings about it. It's like, you should share it, you shouldn't share it. Oh, what if it's kind of like falls back on you and it makes you look bad, or so all of these different advices, right? And so I held back, and then it wasn't until 6 months later I shared my story, because I think we're in a climate right now, not just in our community, but in the world, where speaking your voice, sharing your experiences is more welcomed. I think in the past, we weren't as confident to do it. And maybe it is because we're at home and we're like on our computers all day, and like this is how we're communicating, and now we have the confidence to do so. But I also think it's because seeing all of the injustices in the world, we feel like we have solidarity with people, and we feel like we have more support now to speak our voice, whether it's about like racism or Black culture, or whether it's about LGBTQ matters and prejudices in that community, or in this case, sexual misconduct. So because of that, it gave me more confidence to kind of push forward with this. And I didn't know what to expect, but it was kind of a catalyst in the West Coast for other people to share their own sexual assault or harassment stories. And I think, that was a catalyst of that. And over the last almost 2.5 weeks now, hundreds of people, men and women, and anyone have they've came forward with their stories. And it's been, although it's been really upsetting to see something, I don't know. I can't it's hard to actually project how I feel about it, because it is really disappointing. And I think disappointing is not even the word I'm looking for when it comes to coming from a place, and I'm sure you ladies can relate to, our community, we talked about this earlier, our community has always been a safe space for a lot of us. And we feel our most vulnerable when we're in the studio, when we are dancing. And so to have that revoked, or to have all of these things come to surface within the dance community, it's a shock. It is quite a shock. And that's why I say, our community is currently in a crisis. We're in a crisis because this is a big issue that needs to be talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally agree with you, and I'm sure Michelle does too. The dance community has always been a sacred space, and to have it tainted in such a way, like you said, is very disappointing. And I also agree with you that quarantine has definitely put things into perspective. People don't have the distractions of going out, right? So there's a lot of introspection, a lot of reflection, and time to face some very serious matters that maybe we've been putting off for way too long. I just kind of want to talk about the momentum that you saw from your post about this incident. Were you the first one that came forward about this person, and then people were starting to speak up about them, or were you motivated by someone else's?
As far as, well, to try to be as transparent as possible. So we, like in our community recently, there's been we've revoked the word urban, right? So we are taking ownership of our negligence and our ignorance to Black culture by implementing the word urban and trying to basically like capitalize on a word that's actually very hurtful in the community, in their community. And under this discussion, people brought up this leader, right, who was my perpetrator in this case, how like this said person was not representing their studio and like kind of co-signing with their like revoking urban, but on their personal page, they were totally against it, right? Or they were not co-signing with it. So it was a misrepresentation from like personal versus business. And so a lot of people were calling this person out. And as they were a hot topic, more and more people were hopping on. And I don't want to say hopping on like it's the trend. To me, if you have something to say and it's like an experience that you've had that is really important to share, or it was an injustice, or it was unethical, it was unfair to you, then share your piece. Like, to me, that's not cancel culture. It's not a trend. And I think that's something we can get into later. We are sharing awareness and spreading and educating people about like our surroundings and just, you know, as a community. And so as this discussion happened, more and more people came forward about this leader in the community, this specific leader, about other instances where their integrity as a leader and a person and credibility was up for question. And so when that happened, although my experience was completely different, I felt encouraged to share my piece, because I think this is just, although there was a lot of question about this person's integrity, I knew that my story was really important to share, because and possibly at the time, I was like, I might not be the only one. I might not be the only one. And as a leader in the community, to have that power and for people to walk into your studio supposedly feeling safe, you know, and even kids as well. It's important to say your piece and to share your experiences to prevent that from happening again, or to have other people who have as survivors to come forward about their story. So I came forward about my story, and it turns out I wasn't the only one. Not even, although mine was isolated to an email, thank God, right? Although mine was isolated to an email, there are other experiences that people share that were within, with like physical experiences. And there was another person who even received the same exact email. And they didn't know who they were. They never found out. So that kind of, again, was the momentum for other people to come forward. And these stories, man, like, although there's been several different experiences, I think it's revealed that a lot of the people who have come forward as survivors and reveal their perpetrators, a lot of these people are our friends, you know, or people that we know, people who we wouldn't expect, whether they're the survivor or the perpetrator. It's like we know all of them. And so as a community, what do we do now? I think with other injustices in the world, as we're on Twitter and Facebook, and we're like, we see these posts of like sharing and like we see posts of like pictures, and we're like, share this picture so we can catch this person, or like this person in the government is doing us wrong. Share this so that everyone knows it. And I think we're so quick to share, but when it's someone that we personally know, or when it's our friend, and we're like, oh man, like we're conflicted. because it's like, what do we do? But at the end of the day, like, we have to prioritize our community safety. We have to prioritize creating a safe environment, creating an environment where we can walk into the studio and we don't have to feel like we have to like watch our back, or we can have fun with our teammates and our friends, and not feel like we have to think about these things that we shouldn't even be thinking about in our dance community, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And, in preparation for this, Devin and I did some research, and, we pulled some statistics, and of the sexual abuse cases that are actually reported, 93% of them actually know the perpetrator. So this is going back to your point, Janelle, where, you know these people, and, part of the problem is that these people. And so there's a level of comfort or discomfort, or maybe that's not the right word, hesitation in revealing them, and revealing, the way that they've basically violated you, because you've known them. And you consider them friends, you consider them acquaintances, you consider that space to be safe. And so, I know that you talked about ultimately why you made the decision to come out, which I think is extremely courageous. And, I want to commend you for pioneering and sort of propelling all of this momentum around this, because I think it's really important. And I think that you, with your courage, have given a lot of other people in the community courage to actually come out and come to the forefront and bring attention to this very important situation, because we shouldn't be felt as if we're violated or being manipulated, particularly in the dance community.
We are going to be talking about things that we've swept under the rug for way too long. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about understanding what sexual harassment is. Janelle, could you talk us through that?
Yeah. So disclaimer, and I said this before we hit record too, but I am not a professional. I am not educated. Like I don't have a degree or anything in these matters that we're discussing. But again, I have been able to listen. I've done a lot of listening in the last few weeks, ever since this Me Too movement has resurfaced in our dance community. And again, I'm here just to be of any resource as possible. And so I'm so glad, Devin and Michelle, that like you have asked me to be here. I'm honored. But my experiences and what I've been able to accumulate and sponge is just that, like my own experiences. So for sexual harassment, there's a lot of layers to, and I think we're going to go through these layers of just sexual misconduct, right? So sexual harassment can be anywhere between like sexual verbal advances, like that do make you feel uncomfortable, like things like I don't know, like telling a girl like, wow, like look at that skirt, like look at how it makes your legs look, and things like that, or like just unwanted verbiage towards you, and not even limited to verbiage. It can even be body language. It can even be like a touch on your physical self, right? That is unwelcomed. And I think at the core of all of this sexual misconduct, it's about consent, right? Lack of consent for you to have this exchange with this other person, or like in this case, a perpetrator or predator. So, and I think a lot of the time, like we don't even realize it's happening to us. Maybe we just think someone is just like being them, right? There's like this stigma of like, oh, they're just like that, but sexual harassment can come in like different forms, and even like down to like microaggressions of things that we can't really catch right away. And then maybe like with reflection, and it could be years later, we're like, wow, like I was sexually harassed at that moment.
Janelle, that's actually, it's kind of, it's making me tear up and get a little choked up about it, because when you did speak out about your personal experience, it definitely triggered me or prompted me to do a lot of reflection. And actually, as you were just speaking right now, I had a quick flashback of an interaction that I had at a dance competition, and someone made a comment to me and they said, you look like a porn star that I watched last night. And that was like a long time ago. So at that age, I think I just kind of brushed it off and was like, well, boys will be boys, right? But it can be as simple as that, you know?
And it's, it's the thing about, I think this is like an analogy we've heard before of just because a girl is wearing a crop top and shorts doesn't mean she's asking for rape. Like because of how we're expressing ourselves, or like at least like how we dress, and as far as like how we're holding ourselves, we are not asking for this like the sexual harassment or sexual assault, right? And I think the assumption is of the assumption of wanting something, or wanting these comments, wanting these interactions, is something that we have to get rid of. We have to get rid of it. And I don't like, what's the solution? We're all working towards that. This is a world problem. This is not just condensed and isolated in our dance community. This is a human problem, like within our nation, within the world. So how do we, as our community, as our little dance community, which is like actually like nationwide, how are we going to combat that? And I think, again, like things like this, like educating, talking about it, proactive discussion is necessary, and establishing like boundaries too. But even then, even as in our case as women, when we establish these boundaries, how are they enforced? How will the second party in this interaction, how will they know that we're serious about it? Even like, because sometimes it's like, oh, they're playing hard to get, and it's a lot of the times that's not the case. We don't want these comments like, don't tell me that I look like that porn star you watched last night, like, ew. So we're trying to work our way towards establishing these boundaries, but now we need like community support to enforce this unwanted, this like basically retraction of this unwanted behavior.
I really like what you said, Janelle, about, just because we wear something particular, or even in dance, dance is an expression of self, and, it's sometimes can be, sensual and come off sexual. But it really is just an expression of ourself. It's not a call to say, I want this from all of you. Right. And I think the big misconception, and, and I realize that, there are all types of people affected, not just females. Of course, I can only speak from a female perspective, but I think that as females, we need to make sure that the men in our community understand that just because I wear a certain type of clothing, or just because I move a certain type of way, is not an open invitation for you to come and say anything inappropriate to me, or do anything appropriate to me, or make me feel violated or manipulated in any way. And the same can be said for anyone in this community. And I think it's going back to what we talked about, the dance community feeling safe. And we need everyone in the community, male, female, whatever gender you identify with. You yourself need to be accountable for your actions and how you react and how you treat other people in the dance community, because that is the only thing that is going to propel change. So you need to look inside yourself, and check yourself, right? And say, is this the right thing for me to say? Am I making this person feel uncomfortable? And I think once that happens, then we'll start to see some change. But until we start to see that change, we're still going to continue to have these discussions. So I love what you said about that. The other point that I wanted to make was, things that you talked about with regard to sexual harassment. I want to kind of move towards to how that sexual harassment can advance into a more advanced stage of sexual misconduct. As we were researching and preparing for this episode, and as all of this sort of came to surface, we were seeing a lot of people come out and talk about how they were offered rides home from their directors, and then their directors were forcing themselves on them. And so I want to move from sexual harassment into sort of the next phase. And also, Janelle, I want you to talk a little bit about that grooming, because I think grooming plays a big role in that, that we're allowing ourselves to be comfortable with people that we know and people that we trust and people that we respect. And all of a sudden they're violating that by making advances or, doing inappropriate things and forcing themselves on us.
Sure. So a lot of the time grooming is referred to in a situation where there's a child involved or someone underage. But I think as adults, we can definitely be groomed as well. And grooming and in this case can be defined as manipulating someone or also a child as well, just manipulating a victim in the sense and to get something out of it, right? So you can, as a perpetrator, they can compliment their victim. They can give their victim something like, oh, I'll give you a ride home, or I'll take you home. Come trust me, come into my environment. So basically trying to manipulate the victim to create a safe space for them so they can feel comfortable. And so this is basically the transition from kind of identifying who they want as their victim, transitioning to grooming, and then to transition, if they have made it this far, transition into their assault or something more elevated than just assault, right? So a lot of the time in our community, especially with the youth, I think we're all very vulnerable to this grooming, right? Like you just mentioned, leaders or directors even grooming these kids into a safe and welcome environment so that you can manipulate them by giving them rides home. It was mentioned in other discussions I've had, buying the underage alcohol, giving them a place to stay, giving a house for underage dancers to the party at. So they're trying to create this relationship and establish this sense of trust in order to get something more out of it. And I think another even more steps beyond that, if we're adding to the layers, would be sexual assault. And I think earlier I mentioned coercion. So coercion is basically it's kind of like blackmailing. Blackmailing someone to do something for you in a sexual way, or even forcing someone or bribing someone even to do these things for you. And so if from an outside perspective, you might think, oh, that was consensual. Why are they calling it sexual misconduct when it was consensual? But behind the scenes, it might have been coercion, because there might have been an exchange of you do this for me, or else you won't get to be a leader next year. You won't get to be in this piece. You won't get to be a choreographer for the next medley, things like that.
Oh, those are all really surprising and heavy things to talk about. I think, it can be really hard to distinguish those favors or those certain actions as being things that are warnings of sexual harassment and assault. So what are some things that we can look out for to understand, like, this is sexual harassment, this is sexual assault? Because we are very impressionable, and under certain circumstances, we may rationalize with ourselves, right? Like, oh, they were just acting that way, right? Or, they were really nice to me.
So like I said, I think that the basis of like sexual misconduct is like not having consent, right? Or being put in a position where you are uncomfortable and you feel like you are almost being forced to deliver yourself as like an instrument for sexual pleasure or things of the sort. And I wouldn't even say that there's no way that we can actually make a Venn diagram of all of this and say like, this is sexual harassment, this is sexual assault. If it doesn't fall under this list, like it's not that, because everyone interprets things differently. Right? So let's say and this is like an in-dancer in studio experience. So let's say if we are in the studio as a team and we are blocking a piece, right? We're blocking a piece. A lot of the time, directors like to be hands-on, like, I'm going to place you here to put you here, right? And then one of my directors, they grab me by the waist and they're like pulling me to my spot. Maybe to my neighbor, maybe to my teammate, they don't care, right? But to me, that's a violation of my own privacy. That's something I don't appreciate, and I actually feel very uncomfortable with that. And that's okay. That's okay. I think a lot of the time we invalidate our reactions to things in order to follow the norm of what's been demonstrated in front of us. But we shouldn't. We shouldn't, because we are all human. We interpret things differently. And for me, I feel like if it makes you feel uncomfortable, if you're in a position where you feel like you are even like almost like helpless in a situation of like sexual misconduct, then you're I think it's okay to, no, it's not just okay, like you are validated. Your feelings are valid. You were right. And if I think there's like the next step is like, how do you go about that? And obviously there's a lot of different ways, but that we can discuss soon. But I think it's also understanding that sometimes people don't know. People don't know what those boundaries are because they haven't been set, right? So I think as far as like an immediate solution would go is just communicate. Like if it's something like if it's a more entry level misconduct, and I say entry level because I don't want to like compare, right? I don't want to compare like, oh, this is worse than this and worse than this, because again, we all interpret things differently. But if it's something at the same level as like, touching me here, touching me by my waist, then I think an immediate solution, or at least step, right, an actionable item in that situation is to communicate like, hey, like, I actually don't like it when you do that. And however that person receives that information, again, we all react differently. It's still like the same, however that person receives that information it kind of tells you like how you can move forward in that. And I think what's been revealed to me in our community is that a lot of us don't even have the confidence to do that, to communicate like, hey, I didn't like that in that moment. Or again, sometimes we realize it days later, months later, years later, like, oh, that happened to me and I didn't like that. And then we feel like it's too late by then, So I think one thing I want to do is normalize that discussion, normalize that verbiage, and know that whether you're whatever party or whatever whatever role that you play in those interactions, like, welcome that discussion, welcome that communication, welcome that verbiage, whether you are the person who like grabbed me or whether I'm the person who felt uncomfortable. I think that discussion needs to like be welcomed, and the only way we can do that, at least what it seems like in this moment, is to create an environment where that discussion is welcomed community wide, and not just and normalize that kind of culture, right?
You know, over the last several weeks, we've seen a lot of leaders actually come forward, you know, and not necessarily come out and admit anything, but they've come forward because they want to be accountable for how their teams are run, and really helping navigate this change. You know, I saw a post, you know, about a call to action for leaders of junior teams. Stop having these house parties where you're having underage drinking, you know, and I think that that's really important. It's just one example, but it's really important, as you said, Janelle, to make sure that we're all comfortable navigating through this change, and we're all comfortable having the discussion. If I'm the receiver of some feedback that made you feel uncomfortable, then I need to respect that, and I need to honor that, and I need to do better, right? But also as young people on these junior teams, we need to be better at calling out our leaders and our directors, and calling out the people that make us feel uncomfortable. So
yeah, and it's along with putting our pride aside as humans, right? It's putting our pride aside and understanding that this is being communicated to me so I can be better, so I can be more aware, and understanding that not everyone interprets my actions the way I interpret them. And I think, again, it's normalizing these discussions so that it's not necessarily, if I'm letting you know that, hey, you just made me feel uncomfortable, that's not necessarily an attack on you. I'm looking out for you as my friend, as my director, as my leader, as someone who I care and trust. Like, I'm looking out for you, and I'm letting you know so that you don't do it to other people. And because maybe that interaction and that discussion may reveal that like it's not okay, and it may be peaceful, right? But if they were to do that to someone else, it might not be as peaceful. They might take it like way more offensively, and just like feel violated, completely violated, compared to like a different interaction, right? So I think, again, if we normalize this discussion, then we can, how do I say this? I don't want to say, I was going to say nip it in the butt right away, but that's not how it works, right? It's just so more complex than that. But if we are able to take these early actionable items and be proactive rather than reactive in our situations, then we can stop adding fuel to the fire, right? Adding fuel to the flame, and we can at least distinguish it at its early stages so that we can put it out, right? And I like what you said about the junior teams, right? Let's talk about that, because I think this is an entertainment industry problem. It's not just the dance community. Party life, drugs, underage drinking, everything of this sort. And in our dance community, we are part of the entertainment industry as well. So we've normalized a culture under the party scene. And I had a discussion with someone who is educated in all this, and they said something that has stuck with me, and I've literally shared it with all the discussions I've been having. But they said, the wait is jail. The wait is jail for underage drinking, sexual assault, grooming, even grooming. You can be taken to court for grooming, so the wait is jail. And that's a territory in our dance community we never talk about. It's just untouched territory, because it's like at that point you're involving the law, right? So I think it's a reality that we just never think about, right? And to take accountability for our actions. Like, the wait is jail. Like, it doesn't matter. You're not safe just because we're all in like the dance community together. This isn't just like, oh, like, but you're my teammate, so it's okay that you're you're grooming underage dancers and giving them alcohol and putting them under your roof and letting them party all night and getting drunk, and then later on coercing someone into sex, right? The way to jail. And I think like I put emphasis on that because when I heard that, I was like, whoa, you are right. And it's just, but it's at the same time, it's like, it's so realistic. Like, why is it so like taboo to hear in our community, you know? So yeah, like it's a world problem. And I think once people understand as perpetrators what the consequences can be, it really like brings more reality to the situation. And you would hope that the trauma that can be inflicted is enough. Like knowing that you've caused someone trauma is enough of a consequence on your conscience. But sometimes it's not, you know. And I think bringing to light that the weight is jail really gives people a reality check.
That's so powerful. And I'm just like hearing it again and again. And it's really interesting to me that it is taboo to talk about something like that in the dance community. I think a lot of us feel like, again, the dance community is a sacred space, right? It's our magical place that we can turn to and feel like there's not anything in that space that could go wrong. But jail, the weight is jail. I hope our listeners are hearing that the way that you said it, because that's so powerful.
And the thing is that our dance community is so beautiful, and it is our safe space. It's a place where, you know, as humans of art, like it's our place to just feel free, to feel vulnerable, to feel like we can truly like let our walls down, right? And to be violated in that space, again, creates such a complexity in our minds, because it's like I'm in a place where I should feel my most vulnerable, where I should feel like I can let my walls down, regardless of like whoever's next to me, whoever's watching me, and to have that tainted, like you said earlier, and for that space for yourself to now bring you trauma is not fair. That's not, no one should ever go through that, because our community is very beautiful, despite how rogue things might seem right now. So I guess what we're doing is just trying to purify what we had, right? I think we all can agree that there's been things that have been swept under the rug. These aren't new things per se. These are things that have been living under our rugs for years and years and years, and now they're just coming to the surface. And I think that's okay. It's not too late. It's all that matters is that we're taking proactive steps forward, and we're actually doing something about it, instead of just kind of like protecting, you know, like after like so many years of like hiding these things under the rug, sometimes you start protecting what's under that rug, because we feel so, one, comfortable with like how things are now, so therefore we're just like, I'm just going to forget about it. Two, we've created a relationship with these things that are swept under the rug, even though we know that they're toxic, even though we know that they're not good for us. For some reason, we have a relationship with it, therefore we don't want to get rid of it. And this goes for a lot of other things, like that we can be addicted to. It's not just isolated to sexual misconduct that we've kept under there. So now it's time to let go of these toxic relationships, our traumas, as much as we can. And I think as a community in solidarity, we just like, and I say we because I myself like have experienced sexual misconduct in my past, even apart from the emails that I publicized. Like, I feel like if I have allies with me, or people of support, or people who are welcoming me to move forward, then we can all do it together. Like we feel more empowered when we have people beside us. And that's what we're trying to do in our community right now, is to like purify it and do it together.
I want to talk about, Janelle, because you touched on a great thing, and that is, in the dance space, we do feel vulnerable. We let our guard down, and I think that's why, we've talked about it over and over again in this episode. We keep referring to dance as a safe space. I think part of the problem with that vulnerability is there's a whole flurry of things that happen to you emotionally, mentally, physically. I want to talk through some of those emotions. And also the other thing that I want to talk about is how to deal with those side effects, as we'll call them, of sexual misconduct. How do you deal with those, the strain that it takes on you mentally, emotionally, physically?
That's a lot to unpack, because again, like I said it before, we all interpret things differently, and therefore we all react differently as well. For some people, it might be as simple as brushing it off and just carrying forward, not really thinking about it, hasn't created any trauma. I think that's like really entry level, right? But for others, it can create that lasting trauma. And like Devin, like what you were explaining earlier about how like you just had a flashback of someone like telling you like something that you made you feel uncomfortable, like that you didn't want to hear. Our bodies, we sometimes we as humans can't remember like situations, but our bodies remember trauma. Our bodies will always remember trauma, especially under like sexual assault and rape and molestation. Like our bodies remember that. So when we do get these flashbacks, they can come from any type of trigger, like whether it's discussion, and like again, like we put like trigger warnings in the beginning, but it can be as simple as like smelling something, hearing something. It can be as simple as like touching something, like you're washing your laundry, and then you see a sweater that you wore when you were sexually assaulted years ago, and it just suddenly reminds you of that. Like all these triggers are like, they don't make us. We're human, and I think that sometimes we feel like like something's wrong with me, or like I don't know. You're not insane. You're not crazy for remembering your trauma, because our bodies will always remember that, and I think as far as like side effects go, there's so many, like at least like from my own experience. Again, it's flashbacks, like we just discussed. It's mistrust, right? It's mistrust in people who have been in our lives for a long time, who have great intentions for us, but for some reason, like our relationships are tainted not because of what they did, but because of your experience with someone else. Mistrust for new people entering our lives, whether it's like a relationship, whether it's joining a new team, whether it's going into a workspace, and always feeling like this paranoia that you have to watch your back, watch what you wear, watch your own body language, and fear that someone might put you in a position that you don't want to be in. And also like desensitizing ourselves to certain memories or situations or scenarios that have happened to us, in hopes that we'll just forget about it. Right? But we don't really ever learn from that. So it's important that that we can address what has happened to us, and in hopes to move forward, whether that's through therapy, whether that's like even taking one step to like tell one person. It doesn't have to be professional. It doesn't have to be someone like in your team. If it happened like within your team, it can be like just like a confidant, pen pal, anonymous pen pal. It can be even like your own journal, right? There's actual therapy, like research done that shows that when you actually put pen to paper and you're writing, there is therapeutic benefits from journaling and writing anything, right? So I think for me, as people have come forward to me in hopes that I will be their confidant about their own experiences versus like publicizing them, I always make sure to tell them that I'm so proud of you for taking a step to tell one person, because that alone is a huge step in their journey to healing. It just takes one person, right? And it can even be like on a hotline. There's a lot of like different resources that you can call if you're not comfortable talking to someone you actually know. There's a lot of resources, and I think one of the things as a community that we need to do is not force people to talk about it. Is not force them like, oh, you have to tell me the details, you have to tell me this, but to suggest that like if they would like to talk to you about it, then you're here, and creating that welcoming environment rather than because it already takes a lot for people to even speak on this, and to get re-traumatized because you're being forced to like share details that you didn't want to go into is again re-traumatizing. It's re-traumatizing. So as a community, we need to do better to not force the survivors and get details out of them if they're not comfortable sharing their story. All we can do is suggest that that we're here and to acknowledge that we're here and to suggest that if they would like to come forward with the story that you are here as a confidant. But we like to force people to go into detail is really re-traumatizing. And I think that's been, that's in different, not even just the San Diego community, that's been like an issue of like survivors feeling scared about coming forward because they've seen other survivors' experiences about publicizing their story. And now people are questioning these survivors because they didn't give enough detail. People are siding with perpetrators because the survivor wasn't clear about X, Y, and Z. And so in doing so, it discourages other survivors to come forward because at the end of the day, they want to be heard, and supported. And it already takes so much to just even say like, hey, like I was sexually abused, so what more? And so I feel for those people who are witnessing all this and are still scared to come forward because of this discouragement.
What would be some recommendations or tips that we could give to our fellow teammates if we're, bystanders and we see sexual harassment or we see sexual misconduct? What are some things that we can tell them to help, put a stop to all of this?
I think each scenario calls for its own action, right? So there's different ways to go about it. I think prioritizing, again, like I'm only speaking from what my own experiences have been and what I've heard over the last few weeks about like actionable items and solutions. Prioritizing the person who is receiving this interaction, this unwanted interaction, prioritizing and focusing on how they feel about it. So, example, if let's use the same example of being grabbed while blocking, right, by the waist or something. If I see a teammate and they're put in that position and then I see their reaction, it's very clear that they were like uncomfortable and like maybe they're like holding themselves or like they feel violated. Personally, I can't say that this is like the solution, but I would personally go up to that person and ask them like, hey, like, was that okay? Like, or do you feel okay? Like, did that make you feel uncomfortable? Like letting them know that you notice that there was an interaction that wasn't okay, and so they don't feel alone. They don't feel like they're invalidating how they feel in their head. Because I think, again, a lot of the time these behaviors we've normalized, right? Like putting our hands on people, or even like if there's like I think nowadays, like freestyling and having this interaction during your freestyle or something is like it has been another topic that we've been discussing, and just like consent in that, or like maybe like someone might have touched you in a way during that artistic moment and you weren't comfortable with that, but we've normalized that. It's like, oh, they were just like doing their art, is letting the victim have a place to like really say how they feel in that moment. Because I feel like, again, we've normalized these behaviors, and so maybe they might feel like, I don't know, like immediately invalidating how they feel in that moment. So again, giving the mic to them, and then letting them know, like kind of guiding them and like being an ally in the situation, and letting them know like, is there anything I can do? And versus, oh, I'm going to tell them for you. Because right away, I think that puts them in a more uncomfortable situation, depending on the person, again. But that puts them in a situation where they're still not able to speak for themselves, right? Even though we're trying to help them. I think the point is to like let them feel comfortable with expressing how they truly feel, and not muting out their voice with ours, right? So I think it's about uplifting their voice and their perspective in that. And that's just like from a team perspective, like a teammate perspective. And again, if it's let's say it's a more elevated situation where, let's say we're all at this Big Bear trip, right? Like, because all teams like to go to Big Bear and like do all that. And let's say someone sleeping on the couch, and then you see your fellow teammate advancing towards them while they're like, this person is knocked out on the couch, and they're doing things that are inappropriate. Then it's kind of like, if you see something and you're not doing something, like generally speaking, like you're part of the problem, right? So I think as teammates, we need to prioritize each other's safety. We need to look out for each other. Like we all say we're family, so let's treat it as that, like if that was your family member, how would you react? Like if you're older and that was your daughter laying on that couch, like how protective would you be? And so I think instead of co-signing, like we unknowingly co-sign with the perpetrator when we don't do anything, right? So we have to say something. We have to, like, you could save that person from trauma by distinguishing and that interaction from the first step, right? From the early stages. We just have to take action. We just have to take more action, and not just like sit back and like think that it's going to stop by itself.
As a community, like you said, we need to take extreme ownership of the situation and the things that we don't like that's happening in the dance community. And I just want to say that it's been an interesting couple of weeks, because, there is a lot of emotion, a lot of sadness, a lot of distress that's being shared, a lot of shame as well, as survivors come forward and speak their piece. And on the flip side, there's a lot of courageousness and bravery and strength that comes from it as well. And I just kind of want to speak on how beautiful it is to see a lot of men in our dance community, and maybe there have been others as well, who have said, hey, if I've ever made you feel uncomfortable, I take full responsibility right now, and I'm making and taking these steps to correct my actions. I've had people reach out to me and just check on me and say, hey, did I ever make you feel uncomfortable like this? And so I think it's really empowering to see that the community is willing to come together. And I think it speaks to kind of what you were talking about earlier, strength in numbers, because we can't do it alone. And if we are going to say that dance is family, we have to look out for each other in that way.
And I guess I can speak on like all the other issues that have come about, right? Like not just isolated to our community, but although this is a time, like I said earlier, of crisis, we're literally going through a crisis in our dance community. Not only are we on top of sexual misconduct, on top of being quarantined away from like our space and our team and friends. On top of that, we also have like we are confronting appropriating Black culture and Black Lives Matter and racism, underlying racism, or even like I said again, LGBTQ plus prejudices, things like that. Like although it's heavy stuff, it's really heavy stuff, there is a lot of light coming out of it. And again, these are things that we swept under the rug, and it seems long overdue, but we're getting to it right now. And as long as we're taking proactive steps forward, this is, at the end of the day, like it's something that has been so needed, so necessary, and can be so beautiful. Again, like 2020 has been weird. 2020 has been so weird, but it's been necessary. And unfortunately, there's been huge trade-offs. Like trauma has been revealed and revisited. Lives have been lost. Our families and loved ones are sick. So what we need to do as healthy individuals who are capable of taking steps forward, we need to do just that. We have to be proactive because we are blessed with our life today. And as long as we have that, then we need to bring honor to the crisis that is at our front door right now. We need to, or not honor to the crisis, but we need to bring honor to those who have suffered for so long before this crisis, during this crisis. So we just have to keep going. This is not over. This is not something that's going to be over after this discussion. It's not going to be something that's over in the next week. This is like, at this point, these are like lifelong battles that we're uncovering. And we, as a community, we just have to be here for the long run and form these like long-term solutions and actionable items.
Yeah, as weird as it may sound, let's make it worth it. This crisis that we're going through, let's make it worth it. Let's put in the effort and let's propel the change that we need. I think that, crises like these are a blessing in disguise. We may not see it right now because we're going through a lot of emotions, but I think it's a reset for the entire world. And we need to really reflect on that. And we really need to look inside ourselves and see how we can, change the world.
I don't know. If we all do our part as individuals, then imagine like just coming together and moving forward from that, right? Because I feel like not everyone feels like they have a platform. So I think to speak or to share or whatever, and that's okay. But I've been emphasizing that you don't have to be a leader in this community, right? You don't have to be a leader that's been established by your team, your respective team. You don't have to be a choreographer, like making the headlines for every workshop or masterclass or whatever. You don't have to be someone of this stature in order to be a leader in these movements, right? And so it's not about like having the followers, having the views or anything to use your platform. If we all just do our part, then that's at its bare minimum of like creating and establishing solutions. And it's not even limited to just sharing, right? I think, and this is even going towards the other injustices. So not everyone can make these protests. Not everyone, because maybe they have people at risk, maybe they're at risk, right? For like coronavirus, or not everyone has the money to donate. Not everyone has the time to volunteer their time. to help these organizations. Not everyone has a platform to like share all of these trending articles and news and news lines and all of that. So if you feel like you don't check off any of these boxes and you're like, well, I'm helpless. Like I feel like I can't do anything. I'm not seen. I'm not heard. I don't have the money. You can still educate yourself and create these discussions among your peers, right? So there's never a time where there really isn't any excuses at this point. There's no time for us to just like not do anything and like kick back because we feel like, well, there's nothing I can do. Like whatever, like education is key at this point. Like, again, I'm not educated in, I'm not a professional in like sexual harassment, sexual assault, but I've been taking a lot of time to educate myself. You two educated yourself before this call too, so that you knew a lot of like statistics and like definitions and facts, which is important. So although I just said that, I also want to take a moment to emphasize that it's okay to take mental breaks as well. Because although I emphasize like there's all these things that we can do, and if you can't do all these things, educate yourself. While you're doing so, just keep your mental health in mind. I definitely had to take a moment and take a step back from social media because social media plays a part in my career. Social media is like my resume as well. Like since I am a choreographer, social media like was my day-to-day, right? And social media was also my means to communicate with a lot of other survivors to hear their stories. And I assumed that responsibility after I realized that my post was a catalyst on the West Coast for our movement. But I too had to take a step back. I recently had my first therapy appointment like a few days ago with a trauma therapist so I can address my own traumas. Because as you constantly are giving, just make sure that we all have to make sure that we're keeping ourselves like accountable, but also healthy, like mind, body, soul, spiritually, everything. Because it's really hard to like give ourselves away and help others when, we're going through our own traumas. And it's okay. It's okay to do that. You're not like a bad person just because you have to take like a break, and that's okay.
Yeah. Self-care and self-love is not selfish.
Janelle, what advice would you give to someone, both in and outside of our community that, may have experienced sexual trauma in the past and wants to come forward but is hesitating?
Do what feels right. And I know that sounds really simple, but some people feel like, again, we're human, so we're influenced by what we see, right? So a lot of people feel like they have to make this public statement and give all these details because that's what everyone else is doing, right? But there are different ways to acknowledge our trauma and to heal from it. And it doesn't always have to be on a public platform. It can be as simple as, and I don't want to say as simple because these things are like really hard to do too. So it can be other alternatives would be writing in your journal. Other alternatives can be writing in your journal about the situation and to couple that with therapy, right? Or it can be you actually want to have a conversation with your perpetrator, and like maybe it happened 4 years ago, and now you're coming to them and you're discussing what happened. You're sharing your story with them, even though they are your perpetrator. And not everyone is confident to do that or not comfortable to do that. But if you are, maybe that's another way that you can go about your healing. Because sometimes like really voicing out to your perpetrator and letting them know what they did and hearing like whether it's their apology, whether it's their like what solutions they want to find for themselves. And maybe like they need healing too, as someone who hurt you. And some people find healing in that. Some people find healing in just telling one confidant, whether it's, again, on the hotline, whether it's someone like your close friend, a family member, or someone you don't know at all. People find healing in that. So my advice to them would be navigate, acknowledge your options, explore your options. It's because it's not just one, there's no one way on how to do it. There's no one right way. So acknowledge and explore your options, and heal according to what you need as an individual. So I think, again, I'm always going to say this, we react differently to things. We're all human. We view things differently, and therefore we go about our healing differently as well. So don't think that the only way to do it is to like out your predator on social media by name and tell everyone what they did. It doesn't work all the time for everyone. And so don't do it I advise you not to do it if you feel like it's going to add more trauma to you, unless you want to couple that with something else that can bring you more therapy.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you went over that, especially because these matters have been neglected and they haven't been acknowledged. So we're trying to navigate through unfamiliar territory. Like, yes, like you said earlier, these things have happened before, but for us to take action, for us to dedicate awareness and educating ourselves and moving forward, those are new steps for a lot of us. And I think it's really important that we make space for all of the things that we need to work through together. I know we kind of touched on it earlier, but in order to make space for people to speak out, whether it's being apologizing for conduct or speaking up about misconduct, how do we work through being canceled, right, on social media? Like, I know that you kind of mentioned it earlier and wanted to speak on that.
So if I'm understanding, then it's more so like, I think nowadays, a lot of the misinterpretation of what's going on is like, like they were just canceling this person, like it's cancel culture, it's a trend, and etc. I think we just have to uplift the voices of the survivors, and I think the perpetrators, in my opinion, they deserve to be held accountable. If there were public statements and their name was involved, and they have demonstrated unacceptable behavior in this sense, I think they deserve to be held accountable. I think that the survivors deserve to have a space for themselves to like speak up. And I think the survivors also deserve not necessarily like just an apology, but deserve an explanation of what are the next steps that their perpetrator is going to take, and not just themselves, but like the community as well that they're involved with. Because in this state of cancel culture, and this is why I think this is a problem, is we are not canceling out the perpetrators in our community. We shouldn't cancel them. And although I do agree, I think they should step down. I think they should remove themselves from our safe space because they have tainted that. I do think that as a community, it is really important to make sure that we're not just canceling them and they move on to a different community, a different city, a different state, and they haven't grown from this, right? Because where does that put us if we like cancel someone out and we're just like, we don't care about you. We don't care about what you do next. We don't care about your next steps forward. We don't care about your healing. And then they move to the East Coast, join a team there, right? I think we need to hold them accountable, like for their actions, but as well as like, I'm trying to be particular with my words, because I don't think it's the community's, I don't want to say that it's our responsibility to make sure they do it, because at the end of the day, it's the perpetrator's responsibility to make sure that they navigate like through their solutions on how they can heal, on how they can be better, on how to avoid being a predator. again, right? But if we keep, as a community, if we keep focusing our energy onto canceling them, then it simply discourages anyone to find the necessary healing that they need in order to be a better person. Because all people can think about is just deactivating the account, falling off of the face of the earth, the dance world, and moving somewhere else or something. And then they never bettered themselves in that. And I think, again, we need to normalize discussion. So although sometimes it's hard for us to hear the perpetrators out, I think it's necessary for the people being accused to state exactly what their plan is, so that we can at least know that it's not just about our community, but like the world, that they're not a threat to anyone else. Because at the end of the day, like a lot of these people were our friends, were people that we danced alongside with, that we trusted. Like predators don't prey on everyone. Like, so just because they were your friend, or doesn't mean that, like, just because you didn't experience it from them doesn't mean that like there weren't other people. So I know how hard it is to find out about the betrayal, and that you might be experiencing, because your friend may have been a perpetrator. But I think at the end of the day, we have to hold them accountable regardless of our relationship with them. And we have to make sure that they're taking the next steps to better themselves and to create a safer environment in the community, instead of focusing on canceling them and just like shooing them out.
I love that you said that, because I think as humans, and it's always been this way, regardless of sort of the instant gratification, life that we live today, right? As humans, we have always been creatures of out of sight, out of mind, right? If you don't see it, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry about it. And that has sort of been escalated now with social media, because exactly like you said, Janelle, you can just hit unfollow, you can block that person, and it's sort of this out of sight, out of mind mentality. But I think the call to action here with the point that you made is we need to, as a community, come together and make sure that these perpetrators are being held accountable beyond just unfollowing them and blocking them, because like you said, they could move to the East Coast and do the exact same thing, and it becomes sort of this vicious cycle. And we need to stop that, because that cannot continue to happen. So, as a community, our call to action is to come together and making sure that we're holding these perpetrators accountable for that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I wanted to add is, I have pulled away from social media, right? Like over the last few weeks, while like still maintaining contact with those who are coming forward to me as like a confidant. But I've also been working with some people in the industry and the community and I guess this is like something to look forward to, is we want to establish an HR union that studios and teams throughout the nation, so not just isolated to SoCal, but throughout the nation, can basically partner with and receive certification and training and basically the necessary allyship and protocols to put in place, so that moving forward we have, and this isn't limited to just sexual misconduct, but just so that we have a place of unbiased, objective, I want to say consultation when it comes to a lot of the issues at hand. So in this case, under sexual misconduct, this gives a place for both the survivor, both the perpetrator, to go to, so that they can take the next steps in their own healing, or in just navigating what's next for them. And I think, and I mention this now because I right now I'm putting emphasis on the perpetrator as well, because I know a lot of the time when someone gets outed, they feel like they can't go to anyone in the community anymore because they're just deemed as a bad person, or they're deemed as like someone who just needs to be like canceled out, right? And so this HR union provides a resource, an unbiased resource for people to go to, no matter who you were in the situation, to navigate the next steps for yourself and to even like find healing. So we want to work with consultants and therapists and counselors, and establish this kind of human resource in our community, and to create, although we don't, like, although dance is dance and we want to make it about the dance as well, we have to admit that there's been a lack of like of protocol and professionalism in our community. And it's so normalized in other industries, right? Like you have your human resources for all jobs across the board. So why not for our dance community? And so what we want to do moving forward is we want to kind of partner with teams and events and studios across the nation, so that when they kind of have like the certification that's like gone through HR, and so that once you have that stamp, then as you audition for your new teams, as you go into studios, or you are taking part or competing at events, you know that these organizations have gone through the certification and training. So you are basically, again, are in an environment that cares about the well-being and the safety of like their dancers. So this is what we're currently working on. And we have a panel coming up in like about 2 weeks. We're still like in the works of all of it, which is going to feature a lot of known voices in the industry and community. And this is very grassroots right now, but this is kind of like in the works behind the scenes.
That's a great transition into, talking about some of the resources that are available to the community. This seems like a great start to something. We certainly need something like this in our community. I think not only is it necessary, but it really elevates our community because, for whatever reason, like you said, Janelle, we never had this code of conduct or professionalism expectation set in our community. I don't understand why, but I think this is a good time. It's better late than never, right? To implement something like this.
Right. And I think don't get me wrong, I think a lot of studios and teams have kind of like wedged into their contract like zero tolerance policy, and like we are for all people and like this and that, but what does that actually mean, and who is actually enforcing these contracts? And on top of that, a lot of these perpetrators in this case are positions of leadership, so the leaders are the ones enforcing the contract. But what happens when your perpetrator is a leader? Who holds the leaders accountable? Not the alumni, because they're not involved anymore. So by establishing this HR, it basically creates and reinforces accountability across the board. Because I think one of the main points of concern was, how am I supposed to feel safe when it's my leader, when it's my director, like making us feel this way? Because it's not isolated to sexual misconduct. There's also issues with terrible leadership. Let's just say that, right? But it's hard to address that when there's no one higher than that to go to, right? So there's a lot of avenues that we need to explore with this resource that we're bringing about. But it's grassroots right now, but we are definitely going places, and we're so excited for it.
That's great. Do you have any other resources that you can suggest to the community?
Yes. So there's a lot of, and I have like a list right here, but there's a lot of resources, and I'm going to share resources that aren't just isolated to sexual misconduct. But I think you ladies know also about RAIN. So they are the nation's largest sex violence org. on rape, abuse, incest, and national network, because it's not like all of these things, like we there's so much like to touch base on, right? And this is only like a glimpse of the issues at hand. But so that is a resource that they have that you can call. They have a hotline as well. There's also things like the Ujima Community and Loveland Foundation, who are organizations that act as a resource for Black women and girls to navigate through domestic, sexual, and community violence. And also Loveland Foundation helps navigate through healing from these issues. And there's also organizations like API GBV, which is the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence. So that's like, that also is inclusive of like LGBTQ for the Asian Pacific Islander communities. And there's also ones that I've personally been in contact with and trying to partner with them throughout these past few weeks, like Male Survivors, because Male Survivors is an actual organization that supports men who were sexually victimized as children, adolescents, or adults. So I think a lot of the time, like we've discussed, we can only discuss from a female's perspective, but this is not isolated to females at all. So I think Male Survivors gives a platform for men to feel comfortable and to not feel alone in this, because I can only imagine all the men who've gone through something but feel discouraged to speak on it solely because they're a man, right? And they don't feel like their voices are heard. And yeah, I think those are my resources. All the resources I just named, I've personally been in contact with, and in hopes that they can partner with us moving forward and as a resource, or even to just like as an ally. But all of these organizations are wonderful and like basically are ready to partner with our dance community. I guess like a final resource that I wanted to talk about that I kind of brushed on is therapy, normalizing therapy, and how wonderful it is, and how it gets hard before it gets better, right? Because you in therapy, you have to readdress your trauma, which naturally makes you relive certain circumstances you don't want to remember. Maybe you've brushed them like under the rug. But I like as a new participant in therapy, I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think as Asian women in our culture, mental health is a taboo and it's not normalized. And I think it's easy for our parents or families to be like, why are you going to therapy? Like, why are you wasting your money on that? But just as we would go to the doctor if we had like something wrong with our physical health, we should also tend to our mental health as well accordingly. So if it's not therapy, then maybe it's yoga, maybe it's meditation, maybe it's journaling, or just having discussions and not keeping it to yourself. I think to release it into the world however you can, again, whether it's through meditation or writing or discussion, is important, that you're not just like holding on to it internally and internalizing with it on your own. So I think along with all other like solutions and resources, these are like my personal ones that have helped me at least.
I really appreciate that you talked about therapy because yes, I personally have experienced that taboo, right? Interaction, like, what do you mean in therapy? Like, and that can be really hard for us to navigate through, but reiterating to our audience that it's okay. And especially as dancers, we dedicate so much time to training our bodies and we're pushing ourselves through physical exertion. But what are we doing to feed our mind and replenish our soul? I think that's really important. And, this is a time of quarantine. We might not be dancing as much. And I think a call to action is as much time as we've dedicated to going to rehearsals, to going to competitions, to working, our professional jobs, we need to dedicate and allot that time to mental health and also awareness and action around all of the things that we discussed today.
Janelle, we're gonna start to wrap up, but I do want to hear from you. As we navigate through this change and we're trying to work through, all these new things that are coming to surface in our community. What's one thing, or maybe a couple things, that actually give you hope as we progress and move forward?
So many things, and again, I've been trying to focus on the blessings from all of this, right? But being careful to be as realistic as possible, because there's that line between I think the term is toxic positivity versus counting your blessings, So as I'm trying to stay aware of all of the injustices that are happening. I think it's still important to count your blessings nonetheless. So I think the things that are giving me hope are the people I'm working with, and just knowing that we're working towards something to fulfill the goal of creating a safe environment for the community. I've hosted a few Zoom calls throughout the past few weeks, calling anyone from the community. Again, you don't have to be a leader, just because you don't have to have a platform to be a leader, but leaders of the community, dancers of the community, to come forward and share their solution-based dialogue, and just hearing how passionate everyone is to create change really gives me hope. So the more discussion I have, although you would think that speaking on sexual traumas every day for the past 3 weeks is it seems exhausting, but to be honest, it's fueling me more than ever. And it gives me a lot of hope that as long as we keep this fire going and this and having discussions with passion and grit and the tenacity for change, and just speaking to like-minded individuals like yourselves, who have equal concern about all of these things, definitely gives me the fuel to keep my hopes high. And I think also, again, we've touched on this, but the solidarity that has come out of all of this, right? I think along the way, we might have lost friendships. We might have lost relationships. Maybe even our closest friends weren't vocal allies in this, and we feel betrayal in that. Not necessarily they did something wrong, but just seeing how the inactivity of others. A lot of us are disappointed in things like that, and so therefore we feel like we've lost friendships along the way over these issues. But I think there's also been a lot of beautiful connections established through being a confidant for people I've never met before, or having these proactive discussions. And even this whole thing brought us back together, after so long. So I think there's a lot of beauty in the reconnection or the new connections that I'm having, although along the way, not all friendships were maintained, unfortunately. And I think that's just how it goes, to be honest. And I think that's a trade-off I'm willing to take at this point. And I want to continue to surround myself with individuals who are passionate for reform, and want to create a change in our community, and purify it to what we believe it to be, which is a beautiful and safe environment for artists,
I, for one, learned so much from this, discussion. I mean, despite all the research that Devin and I did to prepare for this, I just having these discussions and talking about, how they connect to our dance community, I think has given me a lot of insight into how we can move forward, and also just a lot of moments of reflection as we're talking. And so I want to thank you for that, Janelle, because I got way more out of it than I was expecting out of this discussion. I definitely wanted to listen to what you had to say, but I think I had moments of deep reflection, and I feel very grateful for this. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I'm going to hand it over to Devin, but before I do, I want to personally thank you. I, for one, just adore you. I feel very honored and privileged to know you. And I hope that we can have another discussion, not necessarily on this, but just have another discussion and have you back on the podcast, because I love being able to reconnect with you.
My dog Max is being pretty vocal. I think he's also feeling really enlightened by this discussion, so I'll keep it short. I echo everything that Michelle just said. And also, Janelle, I just want to thank you, because I felt very nervous for this discussion, like right up until we hopped on the call with you. And I don't know what it is, if it's just nerves, if it's just anxiousness, if it's shame, right? Because there can be, and I'm not sure why, but for me personally, there's a lot of shame built around this conversation. And to be able to break that down with you, as soon as you started talking, I felt so relieved, and I felt very safe in this discussion. So I just want to thank you for creating that space for us. And for our listeners, everything that Janelle has touched on today will be sure to leave in the show notes. And Janelle, where can our listeners find you?
Well, before that, I just want to say thank you also for having me. And I think from the get-go, I've already reflected. You both have given me a platform from the beginning for me to share my artistry, and now you're welcoming me onto a vocal platform, right? To share my experiences and the information I've been able to accumulate throughout the years and throughout the weeks of this movement happening regarding sexual assault. But thank you so much for just always advocating for me and believing in me and validating my voice as an artist or as a human. And that means so much to me. So if anyone wants to have more discussions regarding this, if you want to trace my resources or just like talk about anything, I'm more than open. My Instagram is @MilaJanelle. And you can find me on Twitter as well under the same name. But I've kind of been voicing out. I've taken a step back from posting, but I'm definitely on every day to reply to messages and to receive feedback. So I definitely want to extend this conversation with you guys, just to catch up. It doesn't have to be about this, but also to any listeners who also want to talk, I'm here.
Thank you so much again, Janelle.